everyone. I am Kat B.
And I'm Angel Street.
And we are the hosts of the webcast UFO.
But we love coffee and UFOs.
Hi, I'm Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of Paradigm Research Group, and I'm a really big supporter of coffee and UFOs.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Coffee and UFOs, two of my favorite things. And my guest with me right now, right here, is Chuck Zukowski. Hey, Chuck, how are you?
Hey, how are you doing? And I got my coffee.
Oh, nice. Cheers.
And if you, you can look around, there's plenty of UFOs and stuff back there. So, I think I'm going to fit in really well on this podcast.
I think you do. You do.
Oh, and the shirt too, of course.
You've got me outplayed in the background. So you are a UFO investigator. Do you like the term ufologist? Does it matter to you?
I like ufologist. That's good. I mean, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach the masses that, I'm a paranormal investigator, because the word paranormal is anything really outside of normal. I actually wrote a blog about it a little while ago, basically saying, the word paranormal, stop trying to redefine it, because a lot of the ghost shows on TV, I'm a paranormal investigator. Well, you are. You really are, but you just don't do ghosts. Paranormal investigators, can do anything that's out of the unknown. If you want to be just a ghost investigator, you should just say I'm a ghost investigator. I started off as a UFO investigator, but I got involved in other things.
Right. And to check out all of your blogs, it's ufonut.com. And right there. Yeah. So you're reading my mind. Anyone who's listened to my podcast know that I defend the word paranormal as to being applicable to everything really that is outside the scope of what we typically view as everyday accepted experience. And so for me, growing up, that meant when a paranormal show would come on, that would include UFOs. Spontaneous combustion, cryptozoology was all under the same umbrella.
I mean, it's been around for a while. I was just reading over here that the word para is from ancient Greek, and basically, contrary to,
or parallel,
or parallel to, or something. So it's been, the word paranormal has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, in ufology, if you're a ufologist or UFO investigator, you have a tendency of staying, with the alien theme. And so a lot of times, when I'm lecturing or something, I put UFO / paranormal investigator, which is redundant, but it's for those people in the audience that think it's two separate words. I first started when I got involved in ufology. I was more involved in Roswell first, and became a Roswell investigator, and then. Then when I moved out to Colorado, I got involved in animal mutilations, and then I got involved in Bigfoot and creatures and creature sightings and all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And then I got involved in ghost investigations. One of my ghost investigations was actually on Ghost Adventures. Zach and the guys.
Well, for everybody listening, you have done a whole bunch of shows. One of the most recent was Alien Highway. And, I can go through a whole litany of lists that you have, of shows on Science Channel, Discovery Channel, Travel Channel, the Unexplained Files, the National Geographic Channel, Alien Valley. You got it covered, and you've been doing this a long time. You are also a MUFON investigator too.
Was a MUFON investigator. And I'm no longer a MUFON investigator. I was on the STAR team. And, I went through the ranks, and then out here I was on the STAR team way back in the day when Bigelow actually funded the STAR team.
Did you ever have any contact with Robert Bigelow?
Not personally, but with BASS, with Bigelow Aerospace, because a few years ago, doing an archaeology dig for the Sci-Fi Channel. My sister Debbie, who was on the board of directors
Mm-hmm.
for MUFON, we did an archaeology dig and found a piece of metal, and then I did literally a little tiny piece of metal. I had it analyzed here in Colorado, and it was aluminum silicon alloy. And then I went back to Roswell, and we did a press release at the next Roswell festival saying I need a good lab really to be able to investigate this further. And lo and behold, Robert Bigelow popped up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I got involved with him personally. But in MUFON, Bigelow was actually funding the STAR team, and that's when I learned that Robert Bigelow was really funding the STAR team for an entity within our government, and I couldn't quite, peg it where I'm. A book called The 37th Parallel was written about me, and it came out in 2016, and it was a New York Times bestseller about that. But
let's clarify what the STAR team is, in case for those who are unfamiliar.
Well, the STAR team is the elite investigators. The most experienced investigators are the STAR team, and the STAR team basically, I don't know if MUFON still has it or not, but we were basically going to be first on scene. Now, no matter where in the United States, if there was a sighting that needed someone with a lot more experience than the investigator that was local, then the STAR team was dispatched out, and MUFON had basically a couple of boxes of specified equipment that we would use. And I actually had the very first STAR team investigation when the STAR team program opened. It was the Mike Duran cattle mutilation here in Colorado. And I threw together a quick team, which included Alejandro Rojas, and who's with Open Minds now. And we ran on this cattle mutilation where the rancher had also seen a UFO. And so I pretty much funded it all. We all got out there and did the investigation, came back to MUFON, and Bigelow, basically when he saw the report, he goes, no, I'm not going to fund that because you didn't find direct evidence of a UFO. And I said, well, geez, if I found direct evidence of a UFO, do you think I would just give it to you, Bigelow?
That's funny. I mean, think of all the materials that have been given away to different people and organizations for testing, and only on occasion do we get some legitimate analysis back.
I mean, literally. I mean, and no offense to MUFON, but if I'm a MUFON investigator, I find smoking evidence of a UFO, and I'm already a seasoned investigator, I'm not going to give it up to company that basically an organization that I'm a volunteer for, because I've already had a game plan through my own website exactly what to do in cases like that. And of course, I would include MUFON, with it. But there's criteria what you need to do. Part of that criteria is deciding whether or not even to go public. And and your listeners or your viewers will probably go, yeah, what do you mean? Well, because if it's just too dangerous, to go public, you have to really, really be careful. The piece that we found in Roswell, I had to contact University of New Mexico because it was a sanctioned archaeology dig with the University of New Mexico that we did, and so the piece was archived. So when I wanted Bigelow to research it further in their lab, and he has millions of dollars wrapped into their his labs, I had to submit a proposal to the University of New Mexico in writing. I had to do all the paper on that and then say exactly what we're going to do with the piece, what type of analysis they're going to do, exactly who's going to do it. And it took about 2-3 months. The board of directors had to approve it. I mean, there's a lot involved when someone else has got the piece.
Yeah.
And at the very last, what I decided to do was just cut a piece off and give it to Bigelow. So there's still a piece archived.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I mean, even in MUFON, there, it's okay if you can have keep a piece of an evidence to send to a local lab to test. Go be with it on site. You can also send another piece of that same evidence,
Mhm.
elsewhere, and to move on, and that's fine. Um, I think it would be rare that there's ever such a tiny, tiny little piece that you couldn't, divide it into a couple of parts. Uh, that said, it does remind me of the Calvine photo case recently. The investigators had the name of the photographer, and they held on to that on purpose. And that's one to possibly protect the identity if they don't want to
Sure,
be outed,
sure.
and then also to allow it time to percolate and see if they can get them to come forward on their own
And
without
that makes
being
total
forced.
sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely makes total sense. I mean, it's the whole thing where it's investigator witness kind of like relationship.
Hmm.
There's some investigations that I've done, not for MUFON, but some investigations that I've done where I'll talk about the investigation, but I'll never name the witness. And there's certain things about that investigation that I won't talk about, just because I promised, the witness not to. So a lot of that stuff, when you're a seasoned investigator, the information that you gather is basically just for yourself
Hmm.
to be used. When you have two different people talking about seeing actual aliens, and then what the aliens look like, what how they walk, how they move, the whole bit.
Hmm.
You know, you can use those definitions in your benefit, for your benefit, because I always get people all the time hit my website, say, I got pictures of aliens and this and that, and they
Hmm.
don't. But I do know, based on these two accounts, that what they both described in two separate states, a
Hmm.
couple of years apart, probably 3 years, 4 years apart, was identical, and
Yeah.
they didn't know each other. So that's the whole bit of of doing investigation, is when you interview people,
Hmm.
and you're going to have a sighting, you're going to interview maybe, hopefully, more than one person,
Yeah.
but you have to pull them aside. You don't want to interview them all together. Now, I used to do that before I was a volunteer deputy for 8 years, and that was
Hmm.
something they pounded in us. City cops here in Colorado can't do their own investigations. It goes right to a detective. But deputies, county cops or deputies, we can actually start an investigation and do part of the investigation before we hand it off to the detectives. I'm not with them anymore.
Hmm.
So, you have to learn a little bit about law enforcement and how to conduct a proper investigation.
Hmm.
And it was really interesting that when I was going through it, I was just flying right through that, those courses, and I was coming up all the answers, the right answers. And they're going, well, have you done this before? And I said, I'm a UFO investigator. I've been doing it at least a couple of decades before I got involved with you
That's
guys.
funny.
And what it is all it is it's, and I do lecture about this particular thing, that,
Hmm.
there's a common sense and there's an intelligent common sense.
Yeah.
Now, everybody has common sense, but intelligent common sense comes in if you're to go hiking.
Hmm.
Okay, you should wear shoes, but intelligent common sense says, what type of shoes should you wear for the places you're going to hike? If
Hmm.
there's snakes involved, you don't want to be wearing open-toed shoes, you know,
Right.
or there's a lot of rocks. You want something that has ankle support. There's a lot of people that they don't fully understand that. They just fly in the common
Mm.
sense. But you got to go more into, you know, uh, a type of common sense that's more of an intelligent. You have to really think it through, and that's how you do with investigations. You have multiple people that saw
Mhm.
the same thing. You got to split them up, because if they're together, A, they may bicker over what they saw,
Sure.
or B, they just may start agreeing, and you may not get the exact information. So what I've learned over the years, if you're interviewing two or three people, you get them aside, you interview them separately,
Mhm.
and they're going to have different stories. That's just, that's who we are. We see
Of course,
things
you look at the same light. One person says it's green, one says it's
Oh,
orange or
sure.
yellow. I mean, and that doesn't mean, but they both saw light. And also, our eyes do perceive things slightly different. Um,
Exactly. And
a different position can change the way something looks too.
right. And
Yeah.
it's also how they were brought up. and their knowledge of tech, of their technical knowledge to be able to understand what they saw. And there's a lot of things. So what I do is I don't really spend a lot of time on the little stuff or the stuff that's fantastic, unless all three of them say one particular thing that's fantastic. So what I do is I'll interview, all three of them, or how many, and then I'll just only focus on those things that were common with all three or four people, and that's the commonality.
But that's not to say the other factors are not real, but you're less reliable than the commonality.
Exactly. I'm not, because witness A could be right on, witness B and C may be out. But the problem is, as an investigator, you only have really yourself, or if you have a team, X amount of time and resources, the whole bit, to do this. And then, so you start at what's most common first, and that's how you dive in. Now, as you get further into it, you can re-interview the other people and very cunningly throw some things in there, to jog their memory. You don't want to say, well, the craft was a craft red. No, because you're feeding, you're feeding false information, or salting, the actually the interview. What you need to say, like, what color did you see?
Yeah. You're accidentally leading them.
Yeah, and you got to be really careful with that. And it's something that that I learned way back, and then in the sheriff's department, that's something that even cops still do today by accident. Just because we're all human, and
sure, emotions
and emotions get involved and stuff. But you have to really think about what you're saying when you interview people, and you have to really think about the questions you're going to ask without seeding, or giving them thoughts that might give you a false statement, not knowingly. They may assume, well, I guess that could be. No, I don't want to know what it could be. I want to know what you think.
Right. Yeah. That's why I wanted to have you on today, Chuck, because I really appreciate that your experience and your point of view and all of these tips. Having just started myself in this process, all my interviews so far have been on the phone individually with a witness. I haven't had a group sighting, where you kind of have to separate people and that sort of thing. But even just on the phone, I have to be careful because being used to podcasting, it's much more conversational, and being interviewing someone, you don't want to be impersonal, but you still kind of have to.
You have to kind of get in there, yeah.
Yeah, and you have to kind of keep your distance just a little bit. You have to maintain that sort of professional space.
What usually turns people off is when you dive right into it. And so what you need to do is, not you, I'm sure you already do this because you have a podcast, you're comfortable talking. But, when you're talking to somebody about what they saw, you just don't say, okay, tell me all about it,
Right.
And you gotta get comfortable with the witness, and you could be talking about anything. Hey, how's your day? What type of, and where you live? How's the weather? And you want to spend a few minutes just getting them comfortable enough to be able to tell you. And I tell you, my wife and I were in Ireland last year, and we visited Blarney Castle. And the whole premise of kissing the stone at Blarney Castle is to give you the gift of gab, to be able to talk to people. I already have it. I've had it. Matter of fact, it annoys my wife because I can just walk up to anybody in the street and just start a conversation, even if they don't want the conversation, but I'll still get information out of them.
I feel you a little bit. I can relate a little bit. Yeah.
So, you have to have that, and you have to be comfortable, talking with them. Now, the nice thing about over the phone is you're in your space and they're in their space. So both of you are in comfortable spaces. So you feel comfortable in your office or wherever, and they feel comfortable in their home. And so you're likely to get, to come across more as an expert and less as an amateur, only because they don't see the expressions on your face. They don't see you fidgeting. When you start talking to people in person, it's the eye contact, and how you use your hands, and you have to be careful, slowly and not real slow. And you got to read got to read their face. You got to read their hand movements. I
And
can tell.
you can't overreact either.
Well, no, you can't
to
overreact unless. Now, and something else too, that I've learned being an investigator is you have to be somewhat a little bit like a psychiatrist, because unfortunately, things happen to these people, traumatic things happen to these witnesses, and they don't have anybody to talk to. So you may just got to just climb up for a bit and just let them dump on you. And I had a truck driver one time that saw a UFO, and this guy was what you would expect a big burly truck driver to look like, with the Kenworth hat, the whole bit. And he literally just broke down crying and collapsed while he was telling me what he experienced. And you have to be compassionate too. You can't think, well, this guy's an idiot. No, because they can read that. So you have to be very, very careful how you address people. That's why telephone's usually pretty good. But when you get out of the field, just, be careful of, don't fidget, make sure you think exactly what you're going to say. Don't mess up your sentences, and don't study your sentences. You got to come across as, well, okay. So I'm lecturing in Roswell this year. I think I'll be lecturing twice, and then I'm going to be doing a UFO investigation seminar, or not really a seminar. I guess it's more of a lab or whatever they call it.
Okay. Workshop.
Yeah. So I'm going to be doing an investigation workshop. So, I've been kind of like brushing up on what I will be talking about. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with just like officer presence. One thing you learn when you're a cop, there's different levels that when a cop comes up to a person, officer, and how they treat the incident at hand.
Sure. I mean, I've experienced that firsthand. I mean, the demeanor, the way they carry themselves, you as a person, you can go into a defense mode very quickly. And that's the last thing you want when you're interviewing a witness. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the very first thing is officer presence. Okay. And that's just you in uniform showing some type of authority when you're there. That's, that's officer presence. Well, then you have to think about that if you're a UFO investigator. You have to dress. Don't show up on a team with a tank top and a pair of shorts and thongs. Because they do judge a book by its cover. I don't care what people say. It could be the best book in the world, War and Peace, or my book, The 37th Peril. But most things is people will judge you when they see you. And if you come across professional, then automatically they're going to decide right there whether or not it's worth talking to you or not, because they've never met you before.
Yeah.
And profiling, people talk about when you're a cop about, well, you're profiling. Absolutely.
To a degree, you have to. I mean, that's what
every cop profiles. And for the viewers
we
out
do
there,
as human beings, we do it every day.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's
to each other.
Human nature. It's just a human trait we have. We profile, and in cops over a period of time, due to experience, can see something based on things that happened in the past, with other crimes, and they can see, okay, that guy. The way he's reacting, the way he's walking, the way he's looking around, the way he stared at the cop and turned away, there's something up with that guy. And so it's not like you're going over and talking to him and, it's against the law. No, with us, with the deputies, it wasn't so much writing tickets. It was just contacts. You had to have, had to do so many contacts per day. And that's just walking up to the person saying, hi, how you doing? Is everything okay? Yeah. You don't say, hi, well, is everything okay? Let me see your license and registration or anything. Or, you don't jump into that. You don't falsely accuse him. You just walk up and say, hey, is everything okay? Because it could be something different. Like, they just lost a loved one or something, or, they got kicked out of their house or whatever. So, you just have to be careful, but you have to read people. And unfortunately, you're profiling when you come up to see the witness. You're looking at the witness. You're saying, does this witness look credible? If they got a beer in their hand and they're smoking a joint, now you're thinking, okay, you're going to lose some credibility right there, only because now the question I'm going to have to ask is, were you under the influence when you saw, when you saw this or experienced this? And if they said yes, but it was just a beer, or not one beer, but after a few beers, whatever, then you got to make a decision. Is it even worth me going forward with it?
Yeah, that's a slippery slope because it really depends, one, on your tolerance, right? I mean, some people can put back a 6-pack and they're not going to hallucinate a UFO or
Right.
something
But you got to put it
extraordinary.
on your report.
But you have to put it on the report and you have to take it
Right.
into
And then when
consideration.
it's kicked upstairs or whatever,
Mhm.
now granted, back in the day, there was a couple of fishermen sitting in a fishing boat drinking some beer, and they were abducted. And then later on, they ended up, on the beach, and on the shore, and the fire was going and stuff. And just because they had a couple of beers, you're exactly right. You can't dismiss the whole thing. But what you got to do is you got to look at, okay, that's something else I've got to deal with now. How much did they drink? And I got a real quick story. When I was a deputy, I ran with another deputy to this call where this lady said that her neighbor was spying on her mentally, right? And this was out in the county. And he says he's got some type of radar system or something, and he's spying on her. And so I'm an investigator, and I'm rolling with another deputy, a seasoned deputy has been doing it a lot of years. We go to knock on the door, and she's wearing the standard aluminum hat and the whole bit. And I'm trying to, now I'm very analytical, so I'm thinking, okay, well, I can see people out of here have got, they have internet via it's Wi-Fi with antennas. Okay, and so I mean, if he had a Wi-Fi antennas pointing her way, and it's going through something audio in the house, and he's broadcasting, is there a possibility she could hear voices and stuff like that? And I'm thinking about all that. You're like, where'd you hear the voices and stuff? And then the deputy says, "Are you done, Chuck?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Ma'am, are you on any type of medication?" He said, "Well, I am." And he goes, "What type?" And she mentioned the type, and it's schizophrenia.
So, hey, but you know what? You did do due diligence.
I did. No,
Right.
I'm not saying that she didn't have encounter. She could possibly do, but from the sheriff's department's point of view, do we need, or back then, do the sheriffs need to go further with this investigation, knowing already that voices, she hears voices anyway under her normal circumstances, and that's taking one deputy off the street. They have to understand, deputies in the county aren't like city cops. There's not a whole crap load of them. We may only have 8 patrol cars for 1,200 miles.
Well, closing out cases, as you know, in MUFON, it's really a probability. So you have to look at what the data you have, look at the absence of data as well, and make your best guess. Because
Exactly.
most of these are objects that are in the distant. It's hard to really get a grip on what it actually is, unless it's something extraordinary, and they have a detailed description of it, and it's a closer object. That's different. But otherwise, you have to go. It's 90% probably, conventional. It doesn't mean that for a fact.
Right.
But you gotta close the case one way or another, and it can go on the other side as well.
Well, I mean, my sister Debbie and I flew to Missouri, and we went to this small town because they were saying that there's a mothership that was appearing, and she called me up and she said, can you get down there? Well, I contract, so I can make up my time. I don't get vacation though, so I just go off and come back. And we went down there, and it was really sad because we met with the sheriff of the town, the mayor, and part of the city council. And this has been going on for 2 weeks, and so we were down there. And sure enough, the sun goes down behind a really close mountain, up pops a light. Right off, I knew what it was because when you get involved in ufology, you really have to learn the stars. So when I lived in California, I was with Orange County Astronomer Association, and I have an 8-inch Smith Cassegrain telescope. And then when I moved out to Colorado, I was with Colorado Springs you know, I'm in a different part of the U.S., so I might see something a little different out here.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an idea, but I had, what it was, but I pulled out you don't need it now because we all have apps, but before apps, it's called a Celestron Starfinder, and I turned it on, pointed right at it, and it was a planet. And what it was, the planet was always there, right? But when the sun goes down, you can see it. And then, of course, it just slowly moves out of the way.
Right.
And you can't, you don't know how many people, when you ask them, hey, can you see the moon during the daytime? They say no. Absolutely, you can see the moon during the daytime. Yeah. They just don't look up.
No, you're right.
The moon during the daytime. Absolutely, you can.
Yeah. Some people get surprised by that. It's funny because you wonder at what age, does somebody experience that, notice it, I guess, for the first time. I was assigned a case here in New York recently, and I'm going to ask you about this. So it was pretty an interesting object. I'm thinking it's conventional. It's kind of cylindrical, it reflected light. It had a silver color. It was there and then it wasn't there. But the person did look away for a second, then look back. But that's not the thing. The thing is that after this conversation that we had, and like you said, started off with breaking the ice. And so I guess they got a little more and more comfortable. They had asked, do you do anything else besides UFOs? And then I said, well, let's just say someone reports a UFO and they also notice a Bigfoot. We'll include that in the report, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, what about alien abductions? So then he started telling me this other story when he was a child, and then another visitation when he was older. What do you do when you're in that kind of situation where your primary focus is one thing, and then someone starts telling you all these other experiences that they have?
I mean, what I do is I just kind of note it, and then I ask them, anybody else in your family have any experiences similar to that? Because sometimes it's within a family, and I can explain that a little bit later because it was in my family. So I mean, and then if there is, and it's someone that you can get to and talk to, then you have a little bit more than just a sighting. Now the sighting was there for a reason, and maybe that person was the reason. And I used to do a lot of abduction cases. My last one, after my last case, I just quit because it was a Stan Romanek case. If you feel
I remember that. Yep.
Yeah. And I put a lot of time and effort in that, and it turned out that he was just fabricating evidence. Now, I'm not saying he didn't have a sighting. He did have a sighting, and it was witnessed, and he had it on video and everything else. But what happens, especially now with social media, you get a following of people, and you get all excited, and now you're popular. You have that 15 minutes of fame. You're on a bunch of YouTube videos, and now podcasts or radio shows. Hell, we were on Fox News, right? And then when it dies off, you don't want it to die off. Especially if you really enjoyed, the free stuff you were getting. So
and you're invested in it.
Stuff, people were paying his house payments and bought him a new van and all kinds of goofy things. So he embellishes that and was going a step further, and then eventually he got popped for child porn. I have a theory about that, but anyway.
Well, that's interesting because there was someone else in MUFON who just a couple of years ago got popped for child porn. Isn't that interesting? That I'm not saying, I don't know. Is there a there, or is it just coincidental?
I'm not going to mention the name because I'm
not either. Yeah, but I'm just asking, is it? But do you think there's a there? Or
I was on to him from the first day I met him. Okay. And even though he was with MUFON for a period of time, you just have the spidey senses. You do this long enough, you come up and talk to someone. Of course, it helps when you're a cop. You get those spidey senses, you're tingling, and I could tell that there was a lot of untruth to what he was saying, and on and on. So it didn't surprise me, like it did other people, that was the case. Of course, I nailed Robert Bigelow when Robert Bigelow was with MUFON too. I nailed that right off, that he was working with the government. And then lo and behold, 2017, it turned out to be the Pentagon. I thought it was the CIA.
Well, I think a lot of people would assume that, but just because of counterintelligence
Sure,
operations and that sort of thing. That it
sure,
makes sense. Yeah.
sure.
Um, so so if somebody does that, do you follow up on a case like that, or do you just let it go and
Well, I mean, if it's, if the other witnesses can collaborate with him, there's some type of collaboration. But
Mhm.
you know, what I've learned, and I hate to say this, but I don't do abduction cases anymore because there's a big legality, and you have to really think about this.
Mm.
First off, when someone emails me and says I've been abducted, and then I go, oh, the first thing I say is, okay, go to the doctor. If
Mhm.
you've actually been abducted by an alien, then you were violated, and you got to go to the doctor. You have to have a complete physical. You
Yeah.
have to have a blood analysis done. If it's really messing you up, you know, uh, you know, mentally, you've got to see a psychiatrist or whatever the doctor recommends. A UFO investigator is not the first person you want to turn to. If anybody's out there that's been abducted, you really think you got to go right to the doctor, your personal
Mhm.
doctor, your family doctor, and right off says, you know what? Okay, it's as crazy as this sounds, da 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 da, you know,
Mhm.
and I need a complete physical. I got these marks.
Yeah.
Check these marks out, da da da. Because a lot of
Yeah.
times the marks are actually self-inflicted wounds, you know.
When we sleep,
Oh,
certainly
when they
it can
sleep,
occur.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Other
mean,
times I don't know. A month or so ago, I woke up and I was in front of the mirror and I had my shirt off, and on
yeah.
the side, I swear to God, it looked like a Cherokee emblem, red mark on the side
Ah,
of my. I took a picture of it. I kept it right, and it took a good month for it to dissipate. I went, huh? Was I
how?
abducted by Indians?
Right.
No,
No.
but stuff does happen to the human body. There's all kinds of stuff. It could have been what I was laying on. It could have been anything. Could have been
Exactly. Yeah.
skin irritation. There's a lot of things that right off the bat, you may think it's an abduction, but luckily, my daughter-in-law is a doctor. She goes,
Mhm.
most likely skin irritation, but it was kind of cool that it kind of looked like you know, a
Yeah.
Cherokee
Well,
animal.
that's what struggle with quite a bit is when an abductee says, "I have evidence of my abduction, and here's pictures of the bruises, or the marks," and uh, it's not that I don't believe them or I'm open to believing them, but the bruises aren't enough to prove. It doesn't prove anything. Now, eh, I don't know who's doing the work of Dr. Lier. Remember, he was extracting
Oh
uh,
yeah, I worked
pieces
with
of
Dr. Lee.
okay, there you go. So what what you've seen from him, those pieces that he extracted, were those? Do you really think that those were exotic enough to consider as
Oh,
possibly
absolutely. Him and
implants?
Daryl Sims did a hell of a job, and I've worked with them too. And I'll tell you a quick little story on that. But
Mhm.
um, that's the other thing too. If you can, if someone claims to be abducted
Mhm.
and they say that they have an implant, then there's a step that you can do to just verify if they do have an implant. The other thing that I always do too is if where were you abducted, and they said, oh, my house, and how long ago was that? And then what you may want to do is just do an EMF sweep around that house, or just look around there, look for any evidence of round circles or anything. I mean, we actually found one over in Missouri for one of the episodes of Alien Highway. It happened a few months ago, but it was still
Mhm.
very active, still had a high EMF reading coming from it. So much that our cameraman's $80,000 red camera actually reset when he walked near the circle. Just reset. We just assumed that whatever energy was there dissipated.
Mhm.
And we can talk about energy dissipation a little bit later, but you look for stuff like that. If it was fairly recent, you can kind of just walk around the house, outside the house,
Mhm.
and look for anything very unusual, or talk to someone that's involved. But when it comes to implants, I had a couple out here outside of Colorado Springs that swear that they were taken right out of their truck at 12:30 in the afternoon while they were on their lunch break. They were
Mhm.
parked off and eating lunch, and right during the daytime they were taken. And so this was really fascinating to me. I mean, well, how do you know? Well, because we were coming up, we could both see the truck below, Truck was getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Sure. Yeah.
And they said, and then a couple of days later, both our arms right here, we could feel something inside our arm, and there was no scar or anything. But they could feel something in it, both of them, exactly the same place, and the right arm. I'm thinking, okay, now this is interesting. Okay, I can go with someone like this. So have you talked to anybody about that? He said, yeah, we're going to go see our chiropractor. We have an appointment. We're just going to see if there's something in there or whatever. So the chiropractor took x-rays, and sure enough, there was an object inside, both of them. And the object's about the same size. Now I'm thinking, wow, okay, I got to talk to the chiropractor. Well, there's a doctor-patient, thing going on, I should say. Doctors are very reluctant to just talk to UFO investigators. So I had to go through the whole paperwork thing. I had to get them to sign a release, and I had to sign it and get it to a chiropractor so I could talk to him just over the phone.
Yeah.
And just to see that was the case. And he says, yeah, I don't know what it is. There's no scarring to show how the object was in there. If it was just one person, I would just say it was, deposits of some sort that just collected over, a period of time, which it does happen. But it was in both of their arms, and it happened right after. And that's where I got involved with, Roger Lier. Or no, Dr. Lier, excuse me. Roger Lier was later. Dr. Lier. I contacted Dr. Lier, who was living in Thousand Oaks at the time. And right now, this is something else you guys got to do too if you're an investigator. Once it gets out of your norm of expertise, it's okay to pass it off. Don't sit there and try and figure out something if you don't have the expertise.
Tools, right?
It's just going to muck it up.
Yep.
So it's okay.
You do the responsible thing.
Yeah, pass it off to someone who, and here Dr. Lier had, taken out implants before, and when he's taking out implants, the instruments in his office would flutter because it's a EM field, and I've been writing about EM fields.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, I would never take an implant out of anyone, let alone myself. So,
no. I mean, I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying.
No, I know.
Yeah, if you're in the industry, and there's a doctor out there, and and I think Dr. Lier had worked with MUFON too, but that does this, and you're aware of all that, then it's better just to do that.
Yeah.
So many times I've taken investigations in other states, and I've called up the local MUFON chapter, and I got them in touch with the witness because it's another state. I can't deal with it. I can't fly to Alabama or, South Dakota or North Dakota or whatever. So I call, local MUFON there, even though I'm not part of them anymore. I still call them and I give them the cases because it still needs to be investigated. But you got to know when, when it's time to pass it off to someone who's got a little bit more expertise in that particular field.
Yeah. So you said that you do have experience, or rather familial experiences with high strangeness, with abductions, ETs. What were you talking about earlier?
So growing up, my mom used to talk about, having dreams of floating in the air through her old house where she used to live. And it's all in the book. I'm not pushing the book to 37th parallel. I don't make any money off of it or anything. It's just that, I put all that information out there for people to read. So when I got older and I was involved in UFO investigations and I was out of the house, my mom finally said, when I came over to visit, she's got something to tell you. I've been wanting to say stuff. I just don't want to scare anybody. The kids, and she mentioned when she was a little girl in Morenci, Arizona, there were 6 kids in her family, 3 boys and 3 girls. Interesting. My family with my mom was 3 boys and 3 girls. Anyway, being the youngest, she slept in the hallway on a bed because there just was no bathrooms, small town in Arizona. And there were a couple of times she'd wake up and she'd see little humans running around. And as my mom, I'm not going to, oh, Mom, you're right, Mom, But I knew something was bugging her all my life because, she's always talked about having these dreams of floating. And as you get more involved in ufology, that kind of kicks in, because abductees do talk about, floating, floating through, through their house and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, then I found out through a cousin that her older sister, my aunt,
Mm-hmm.
had a sighting too later on when she was married, and my three cousins were kids in the back seat. And they were driving from Long Beach to Thatcher, Arizona, back in the day when they didn't have Interstate 15. I think it was 40. Back in the day, you would drive. There's no rest areas, so when the driver got tired, he would pull. He or she would pull off on a dirt road.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then turn off the lights so no one could see you, and take an hour nap and go. So that's what my uncle did. So while he was taking a nap at like 1:30 in the morning, because they were trying to make time be there the next morning, my aunt wakes up and looks over, and there's a gray staring right at her, and there's another one right. The window was rolled up, but they're right there at the window.
Mm.
One over there, and she could see a couple in the background.
Yeah.
And that was my aunt, and she was so vivid and precise of explaining, what she saw.
Yeah.
And my mom was the same way. And then talking to other people who had similar experiences described exactly the same thing. The demeanor, the way they walk, and the whole bit.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt had an experience. How it affected me, and I just did shooting a documentary for. I don't know if you know who L.A. Marzullo is.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've done some. I've helped him in the past with some of his documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I helped him again last week, and I was telling him, that I knew at a very early age that that there was something a lot more or bigger to life. And after elementary school, I would go to what they call catechism, which is Catholic school. Basically, it's babysitting after elementary school. I used to get in trouble with the nuns.
I didn't have catechism exactly, but I had what we called CCD.
So you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we still had nuns, or sisters, and I would always get in trouble. And they would, because they'd be explaining something. I said, that's just not right. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than what you're saying. There's more to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't explain it. And I still can't really explain it, why I knew that or why I know that, but I'm very comfortable all through my life. Did I see something? Did I experience something? I have no idea, but I can and that's probably what threw me into, ufology. Out of the 6 kids in our family, 2 of us became investigators, me and my sister. And we didn't even know that we were doing investigations. We later ran into each other after, this is after we moved away and stuff.
Yeah.
And then we started doing investigations together.
What's your take on the OSAP, UFO task force, the, potential another congressional hearing coming up? What do you think's really going on here? Are we experiencing another blue book? Because some people say no, not the case, but I do wonder. Back, in the 50s and 60s, I'm sure there were plenty of Congress people that wanted to know what's going on, just like there is now, and it may have the appearance of sincere inquiry, and I think there is, but I'd like to get your take on how you see it.
Well, it's different now because we just came out of World War II, and then we had the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And so any type of technology that was out there, our military and our government wanted to keep. Obviously, they didn't want to share it with anything, or they didn't want to share whatever. J. Allen Hynek was actually working for the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And matter of fact, if anybody saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when the spaceship was already landed and they were doing the whole bit, and the aliens are coming out, and people are looking, the camera panned. There's one guy that's got like a goatee and smoking a pipe. That was J. Allen Hynek. He was a technical advisor for that movie. But here's a guy that was, he was contracted from the Air Force basically to look at all these sightings and then to come up with a crazy idea of what they're saying. He came up with swamp gas, and you're looking at Venus and all. And over a period of time, after so many investigations, he started realizing there's something really going on here. And then he, in turn, later on, left the Air Force and then became an investigator, a UFO investigator, because he pretty much saw the light, so to speak. So
you're saying you believe aliens are visiting Earth?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I actually, if you would have asked me 5-6 years ago, 2016, before 2016 or so, actually before that, I might have, it's a 50-50 chance. But I've been dealing with stuff that I've seen, personally have experienced, that it's hard for me as an investigator, an analytical investigator, to totally explain what I saw. And then the more I do investigations, the more I learn, the more I realize that, if you just read it just on the surface, it's really easy to say no. But when you start delving into other things too, I mean, I've got an article from 1896 of an animal mutilation on a farm in Missouri, where they saw a round object with lights. And then the next day, there were 3 cows that were killed, void of blood. Typical mutilation case, 1800s. But when you start getting involved, especially with me, being in Colorado, being able to talk to the Ute Indians, the Apaches, and the Navajos, which I've been really lucky to do, you learn real quick that our Native Americans have words, in their language for UFOs. They have words for aliens. Of course, they have words for Bigfoot. Stuff that they talked about, that they knew about before Europeans even migrated. Now, are they all lying? At one point, you have to look at the person, the group, whatever, and you have to think about, okay, just because I may not believe, why do they believe? What did they see? Why is it so much? I wrote a blog a little bit ago about leprechauns, because it's St. Patrick's Day.
It's the season, sure, yeah.
but really interesting. While I was in Ireland, and people still have leprechaun sightings today. I talked to miners a few years ago, and they still have sightings of Tommyknockers. And then when we were in Hawaii a couple of years back on a big island, even on Oahu, I like to talk to the elders because I have the gift of gab, and they still talk about the Menahunis. Now, all 3 of these little guys are about 2 feet tall. They're seeing in all parts of the world. They're still having sightings. So now one has to ask, is leprechauns, Menahunis, and Tommyknockers, is that a species? I had an opportunity to talk to 2 separate people, Native Americans, one Apache, one Navajo. And they said, oh yeah, we call them the blues. Basically, they have a different name, but translated, it was like the color blue or whatever. And it's because they come out of the mountains. And they're like the protectors of the earth. So those little guys, and Cherokee, and a couple of different, I can't remember the other tribe, they actually have a word, in their language for what we call a leprechaun or a Menahuni.
Well, if you want to get a little bit less paranormal, maybe it's not paranormal, but the Homo floresiensis on the Isle of Flores, near New Zealand, they found remains that was like as recent as 10,000-year-old bones of a little tiny human, type hominid, and there are reports up into very recent times of locals saying they still see them, and so it does make you kind of wonder.
It does. Going back to your previous question about why I think it's that we're probably closer to disclosure, you can thank technology for that. See, back in the 50s, it's kind of hard to see. You can, let me go backwards there. You see those cameras back there? Don't. It's backwards. My camera's backwards, so I got to do this.
There you go. That's it.
You see those cameras back there? So those are cameras from the 40s and 50s, the brown cameras and Polaroids and stuff. And I like to collect it just because it gives me an opportunity of what people took pictures of UFOs with. back then. And, and it's kind of a hard camera to work. Nowadays, everybody has a cell phone, right? So every cell phone has got video and got pictures on it. So it's really easy to see stuff. Now, something else too, our military has changed big time. Back in the day of World War II and the Cold War, well, actually, it started changing after Vietnam. The way the soldiers coming back from Vietnam were treated, by some of the citizens here in the U.S., the whole attitude of being a soldier has changed. Yeah. So now you have these very experienced fighter pilots and soldiers on ships and missile bases and stuff that are seeing stuff, and they're catching it on their phone and they're sending it out because they know they're intelligent enough to know and smart enough to know that some of the information like this shouldn't be hidden from the public anymore. Yeah. So all this stuff is coming out, and the Pentagon's going, or that department in our government is going, we can't control this. No, you can't control this. You can't control the internet, or
the phenomena, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, they could pull stuff. There was stuff I was able to see on the internet when it first came out, and now we have the capability of removing stuff completely off the internet. You'll never see it again, unfortunately. And people are, and organizations are doing that. But, you throw a picture on Facebook or TikTok or whatever, immediately thousands of people can see it. And then it'll, if it's trending, then it's millions and off you go. So, and then some of the congressmen, like Congressman Schiff, was one of the first ones to say, hey, look, we have these animal mutilations going on in New Mexico and Colorado. We got to get to the bottom of this. For every cow that dies, there's a multiplier effect, because that means the cow can't calf, which means less cows for the rancher. That means the calves can't grow up and calf, and their calves can't grow up and calf. And all of a sudden, a $1,200 or $1,500 cow can turn into a $40,000 cow.
Oh yeah, no, I get that, and that's why it befuddles me that people say, "Oh, the government is wasting their money on investigating these things." I'm going, wait a minute. If there's something really strange happening in your backyard, don't you want to know about it? And maybe it's for your safety, maybe it's not, maybe it's nothing nefarious, but you sure as heck should look into it. At least find out what's going on.
Well, absolutely. And this generation, my generation, is far more open to UFOs. Although my dad, was in World War II, and he followed Patton everywhere, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I absolutely believe it." Of course, my mom already believed it, but so there was, even back in the 40s, those type of individuals that were open to it. But as we get into my generation, and then now, my kids' generation, and then their kids' generation, it's to the point now where it's just going to be accepted, because we have enough technology at our fingertips right now that we can look up and say, okay, remember when the Hubble first came out? Oh my God, look at that! And now we have the James Webb. That's just it's like the Hubble awesome. Is looking through binoculars.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
It's amazing. I remember when they said, "Oh, we found our first planet," and now we're in the thousands.
Yeah. I remember when the first report came out, they're like, "Oh, we're up to like 5,000." I'm like, 5,000.
Oh, it's crazy. And then
in the 90s, it was like one. Oh yeah, and hopefully, indeed, we will get some solid confirmation. I think maybe this summer. I think they're running the analysis on the data to confirm biosignatures in some of these exoplanets. That would be fantastic to see.
The problem is, and I've written some blogs about this too, because I'm always thinking, right? So the problem with SETI was, and a lot of these physicists are looking for planets that are similar to ours, with an oxygen atmosphere and distance between here and the sun or their star, and they call that an M planet, and on and blah blah blah, and that's fine if you're looking for humans, that's totally fine. But if you're looking for life in particular, and I wrote a blog on this about, can life survive on an ammonia-based planet, and I was getting off, And when I was talking about writing the blog, people go, "Oh, that's crazy. You can't live on ammonia." But well,
Mhm.
guess what? We have E. coli in our intestines, and it lives off of ammonia.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they were finding
Silicon,
bacteria.
ammonia. It's
Yeah.
we shouldn't close the door on
No,
what.
I mean, you can't close the door on science, And so
Exactly. Yeah.
I always, every time I blog on something, I'm working on something right now. I'm still kind of going through my head exactly how I want to put it down, but I think it's kind of a game changer
Okay. All
on
right.
identifying UFOs.
Well,
But
anybody who wants to check that out, go to ufonut.com and keep up on the blogs. Chuck, we're at the end here. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I could just keep chatting with you all day. I love it.
well,
So yeah, any other upcoming events that you want to give us a heads up about?
well, I mean, I'm going to be in May at a conference here, and no, I'm sorry, I apologize. I thought I had it here, but I don't have it. Anyway, up at Cripple Creek. But basically, if you guys want to talk to me, I'll be in Roswell this year.
Mm.
During the July 4th weekend, and I'll be lecturing. I think I'll be lecturing Friday and Sunday, and then Saturday and Sunday, and I'm doing some type of something on Friday. But what I love about places like Roswell is it gives me the opportunity just to talk to people,
Mhm.
and we're in an environment and they feel comfortable talking, about it, because there's a lot of people out there that have had similar experiences.
Yeah.
And my sister and I actually had our own, experience at a Roswell festival back in 2016. We'll say that for another
Yeah.
podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm
Well,
pretty sure let's just say I think there's the possibility of life visiting this planet is greater than not.
okay. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Chuck, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Coffee and UFOs. I hope you enjoyed your own brew and our favorite topic of all time. If you enjoyed this podcast and the Mystic Lounge podcast, please subscribe, review wherever you listen to your podcast, and rate. And I really appreciate all the support. Until next time, everybody, peace and love, and we'll see you on the flip side.